All right, let's get right into one of the most incredible and just decisive naval battles in all of history. It's an amazing story, really. It's got everything: huge ambitions, a desperate chase across the sea, and one single, absolutely audacious gamble that would end up changing the world.
Just look at this scene. This is the absolute heart of the chaos. You're looking at a 120-gun warship, the pride of the entire French Navy, literally disintegrating in this massive, cataclysmic explosion. For a moment, the entire battle just stopped. Everyone, friend and foe alike, was just stunned into silence by the raw spectacle of it.
You see, this wasn't just a ship blowing up. This was the death of a grand strategy. It was the exact moment that an entire army, led by none other than Napoleon Bonaparte himself, became prisoners in a foreign land. So how on earth did it come to this? How did one naval battle off the coast of Egypt manage to trap a legendary general and completely shift the balance of power in Europe? Well, it all starts with the incredible ambition of a young general, Napoleon Bonaparte. It's 1798, and France is at war with pretty much all of Europe. But their biggest problem, their main rival, is Great Britain. Napoleon knew he couldn't invade Britain directly, so he came up with this brilliant and incredibly risky side door approach.
His plan was to hit the British where it really hurt, their wallet. The idea was to invade and occupy Egypt. From there, he could set up a French base to threaten British interests in India, which was the jewel in the crown of their empire. The ultimate goal? To cut Britain's vital trade routes, choke off its economy, and basically force them to the negotiating table. It was a wild plan, to win a war in Europe by fighting in Africa and Asia. And to have any chance of pulling this off, everything had to be top secret. So when Napoleon set sail from Toulon with this enormous fleet and over 35,000 soldiers, almost nobody on board knew where they were actually going. They were a ghost fleet on a secret mission. But somebody was out there, hunting for them. And that somebody was Rear Admiral Horatio Nelson. His mission was simple: find the French fleet and destroy it. What happened next was this incredibly tense 2-month-long game of cat and mouse all across the Mediterranean Sea. For 2 solid months, Nelson was crisscrossing the sea, always, it seemed, just one step behind. I mean, look at this timeline of near misses. It's unbelievable. On June 22nd, Nelson's fleet was actually faster, and he sailed right past the entire French convoy in the dark without anyone realizing. He gets to their destination, Alexandria, on June 28th, finds nothing, and leaves, totally frustrated. And then the French show up just 1 day later. It must have been absolutely maddening for him. And Nelson knew exactly what the problem was. He needed frigates. Frigates were the fast, smaller ships, kind of like the eyes and ears of the fleet. They were the scouts. Without them, he was basically sailing blind. But finally, in late July, he got a solid tip. The French are in Egypt. He spun his fleet around and raced back to the coast. This time, he wasn't going to miss. So Napoleon's army is on land, and the French fleet, under the command of Admiral Brueys, drops anchor in a place called Aboukir Bay. Brueys was convinced that he had set up an untouchable defensive position, a floating fortress that nobody in their right mind would dare attack, while he was about to be proven very, very wrong. Okay, so let's take a look at his setup here. Brueys anchored his 13 massive warships in a long line of battle. On one side, he had the coast and a bunch of shallow water and shoals to protect his flank. He figured any enemy would have to come straight at him, head on, right into the combined firepower of his entire fleet. On paper, yeah, it looked pretty solid, impregnable even. But this is where overconfidence just became absolutely fatal. Brueys made a whole series of critical mistakes. First, he left just enough of a gap between his first ship and the shore. Then, he only ordered the guns on the seaward side of his ships to be prepared for battle. The other side, the one facing the land, the decks were cluttered with supplies, completely unready for a fight. And to make things even worse, about a third of his sailors were actually ashore looking for food and water. And he had no scout ships out watching the horizon. So late in the afternoon, on August 1st, French lookouts spot sails. It's Nelson. The French assumed he'd wait, form up and attack in the morning, like a conventional battle. But Nelson wasn't conventional. He ordered an immediate attack, at dusk, in waters his captains had never sailed before. This was an incredibly bold, incredibly dangerous gamble. And so, at 6:20 in the evening, with the sun setting behind them, the first French cannons roared, and the Battle of the Nile was on.
This is where Nelson's genius and Brueys' big mistake collided. The captain of the lead British ship saw that little gap Brueys had left by the shore, and he just went for it. He sailed right through the gap, getting in between the French line and the land. One by one, other British ships followed. And all of a sudden, the front of the French line was trapped in a deadly crossfire, getting hammered from both sides at once, with one of those sides completely unprepared to fight back.
The fighting was just brutal, terrifying. These massive ships were so close they were practically touching, just blasting each other to splinters at point-blank range. As it got darker, the bay just turned into this hellscape of smoke, fire, splintering wood, and screams. The French vanguard, hopelessly caught in the trap, was just systematically torn to pieces. So the battle is raging in the dark. The British ships are slowly working their way down the French line, ship by ship. By 10 o'clock at night, the huge French flagship, the Lorient, is on fire, locked in this desperate duel. Admiral Brueys himself has already been killed on its deck. And then, the fire reached the ship's powder magazine. The explosion that followed was one of the largest man-made non-nuclear blasts in history. It lit up the night sky for miles. It rained fire and debris all across the bay. The boom was so powerful, so shocking, that the battle just stopped. For a full 10 minutes, sailors on both sides just stared in awe and horror. The very heart of the French fleet had just been vaporized. After that explosion, the fight just went out of the French. Their admiral was dead, their flagship was gone, their command structure was shattered. Their position was completely hopeless. The rest of the night and the following day was really just a mopping up operation as the British picked off the remaining demoralized French ships. The final tally. It tells the whole story. The British lost 0 ships, not a single one. France lost 11 of its 13 major warships. They were either captured or utterly destroyed. British casualties were under 1,000 men. The French, around 9,000 killed, wounded, or captured. It wasn't just a victory. It was a complete and total annihilation.
And this contrast says it all, really. Admiral Brueys went down with his ship, paying the ultimate price for his overconfidence. And Admiral Nelson, even though he was wounded in the head during the battle, had just pulled off one of the most complete and decisive naval victories of all time. But the real impact of this battle was felt way beyond the waters of Aboukir Bay, because Nelson's victory didn't just destroy a fleet, it completely changed the strategic map of the entire war. So let's just run through the fallout. First, Napoleon's entire army was now trapped, totally cut off from France with no way home. The Royal Navy now had total control of the Mediterranean, which choked off French power in the region. This massive victory also encouraged other European countries like Austria and Russia to say, hey, maybe France isn't so invincible after all, and they formed a new coalition to declare war. And Nelson? Well, he became an international hero overnight.
And that really brings us full circle. This one battle, this one incredible gamble by Nelson, slammed the door shut on Napoleon's grand ambitions in the East. It really makes you wonder, right? What if Nelson had failed to find him? What if the French fleet had survived and Napoleon had been able to resupply his army and march east, maybe even all the way to India? Just think about how different our world might look today.